His stars had never seemed so peaceful as they did that night in the Korath Nebula, where clouds of purple and gold dust swirled like paint in water, and where a small human ship drifted slowly through the endless dark. Captain Elena Vance stood at the bridge of the UES Meridian, a medical frigate that carried no weapons and flew no war banners, only the white cross of humanitarian aid painted on its hull and the hope of saving lives burning in the hearts of its crew. She was a woman of 42 years with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights spent caring for the sick and the dying. Across a dozen worlds behind her worked 42 other souls, doctors and nurses and aid workers who had left comfortable lives on Earth to bring medicine to those who had none, to heal wounds on worlds that had never known human kindness. Among them was Dr. Marcus Chun, a gentle man with a quick smile and steady hands that had performed surgery in war zones and refugee camps across the galaxy. A man who believed that every life was worth saving regardless of what species it belonged to. He stood in the medical bay, checking their cargo for the 100th time. Thousands of vaccine doses meant for a colony called Threshold, where a plague was killing children faster than local doctors could count the bodies. The Meridian broadcast peace frequencies on all channels as it traveled, a signal that told every ship in range that this vessel meant no harm and carried no threat. A signal that most species in the galaxy respected, because even in war, there were rules about those who healed. But there was one species that did not respect such rules. One empire that saw kindness as nothing more than weakness waiting to be exploited. The Vecturi Dominion had conquered 12 star systems through terror and blood. Their warriors standing 8 feet tall with scales like armor and claws that could tear through metal. Their culture built on the simple belief that the strong should take whatever they wanted from the weak High Commander Zorth. Sat in his chair aboard the warship Crimson Fang and watched the human medical ship crawl across his scanner, screen like a small and helpless insect. He was old for a Vecturi. His scales faded to a dull gray, and his eyes yellowed with age. But his hatred for weakness had never dimmed, and his hunger for glory had never been satisfied. For months, he had listened to other species whisper about humanity, this young race that had emerged from their little blue planet and spread across the stars with surprising speed, building alliances and trade networks and earning a reputation as reliable partners. The other empires called humans soft because they spent resources on charity and medicine, because they refused to enslave conquered peoples, because they believed in something they called compassion, that Zorth found disgusting. He wanted to show the galaxy what happened to soft species when they wandered into the territory of true predators. Commander, his tactical officer reported, the human vessel is broadcasting medical identification codes and requesting safe passage through the nebula. Zorth let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it had contained any joy. But there was only cruelty in it, only the anticipation of violence. How many aboard? He asked. Sensors indicate 43 life signs, all human, no weapon systems detected. No military escort within range. The old commander rose from his chair and walked to the viewport where he could see the distant gleam of the Meridian against the nebula clouds. So small and fragile and utterly alone. Open a channel to the fleet command, he ordered. I want this recorded and broadcast across 100 worlds so that every species can see what the Vecturi do to those who mistake us for friends. Captain Vance was reviewing their approach. Vector to threshold when the proximity alarm screamed. Through the bridge and turned her blood to ice, she spun toward the scanner station where Lieutenant Park was already pulling up data with shaking hands. Contact emerging from behind the dust cloud, he reported. Vecturi warship. Fang-class heavy cruiser. Weapons are hot and targeting systems are locked onto us. Elena felt her heart pound against her ribs as she grabbed the communication controls and opened all channels. Vectory vessel. This is the U-East Meridian. We are an unarmed medical ship on a humanitarian mission. We carry vaccines for a dying colony, and we mean no harm to anyone. Please acknowledge. The response came not in words but in fire as the Crimson Fang unleashed its forward batteries and painted the darkness. With beams of burning light, the first shot tore through the Meridian's engine section and sent the ship spinning. Alarm screaming from every station as crew members were thrown from their feet and smoke began to fill the corridors. Dr. Chun grabbed a support beam and held on as the world tilted around him, his mind refusing to accept what was happening, even as a second blast ripped through the hull above his head and opened the medical bay to the cold vacuum of space. Captain Vance managed to reach the emergency beacon and activate the distress signal, her last act as commander of a ship that was already dying. The beacon transmitted for 11 seconds before a final volley from the Crimson Fang reduced the Meridian to scattered debris and silence. Hi. Commander Zorath watched the destruction with satisfaction as his crew recorded every moment. The desperate radio calls, the futile attempts to flee, the beautiful flash of the reactor breaching and consuming what remained of the human ship. Send it everywhere, he commanded. Let every species see this and understand that humans are nothing but prey for the Dominion. The footage spread across the galaxy within hours, watched by billions of beings on thousands of worlds. A Vectory warship destroying an unarmed medical vessel while its crew begged for mercy that never came. The Vectory expected fear from the other species and submission from the humans. They did not know that among the 43 dead was Dr. Marcus Chun, beloved brother of Admiral Wei Chun, Supreme Commander of the entire United Earth Fleet. They did not understand that they had just made a mistake that would cost them everything. They laughed and celebrated their easy victory while far away on a planet called Earth. A man in a military uniform received a message that turned his grief into something cold and terrible and patient. The stars that had seemed so peaceful that night would soon burn with the fire of human vengeance, and the galaxy would learn why some species should never be mistaken for prey. Admiral Wei Chun stood alone in a small room on Earth, holding a photograph of his brother Marcus and feeling something cold settle into his chest. Where his heart used to be, the image showed two boys on a beach, laughing and covered in sand, back when the universe had seemed full of wonder instead of cruelty. Back when Wei had believed that humanity could explore the stars without ever having to bear its teeth. Marcus had always been the gentle one, the healer who saw every wounded creature as worthy of saving, the dreamer who thought that kindness could change the galaxy. And now Marcus was dead, murdered by creatures who saw his compassion as weakness and his mercy as an invitation to kill. Wei placed the photograph in his pocket and walked to his desk where reports were piling up faster than he could read them. Messages from diplomats and politicians and military commanders, all asking the same question. What would humanity do now? The Galactic Council was calling for restraint and negotiation, suggesting that Earth file a formal complaint through proper channels and seek economic sanctions against the Vectory Dominion. Some alien ambassadors even implied that the Meridian should have known better than to travel through space near Vectory territory without an armed escort. Wei read their carefully worded statements and felt nothing but contempt for their cowardice. They did not understand humans at all. He picked up his communicator and sent a single-coded message to every human military installation in the galaxy. 3 words that would begin something the universe had never seen: implement protocol silence. Within 6 hours, every human ship returned to port and powered down its communication systems. Every embassy recalled its staff and closed its doors. Every trade vessel stopped in place and went dark. Humanity vanished from the galactic stage like a candle being snuffed out, leaving behind only silence and confusion. The Galactic Council did not know what to think, because this had never happened before. An entire species simply going quiet without explanation or warning. Alien economists watched their trade networks collapse as human goods stopped flowing and human buyers stopped buying. Intelligence agencies from a dozen empires sent spies to Earth and its colonies. Desperate to understand what was happening behind the blackout, the Vectri laughed at the silence and declared victory, announcing to anyone who would listen that humans were cowards who had crawled back to their worlds to hide from Dominion might. High Commander Zorath gave interviews to alien journalists and boasted about his easy kill, describing in detail how the human ship had begged and burned while his warriors cheered. He predicted that Earth would offer tribute and apologies within weeks. Desperate to avoid further punishment from their Vectri superiors, behind the silence, something very different was happening. Admiral Chun stood before the United Nations Security Assembly in a bunker deep beneath the mountains of Switzerland, facing the leaders of every nation on Earth and the governors of every human colony. He did not cry for his brother or beg for sympathy, because there would be time for grief later, after the work was done. Instead, he presented a plan that had been locked in military archives for 200 years, created for a day that previous generations had prayed would never come. A day when humanity would need to show the galaxy exactly what it was capable of. The plan was called Prometheus Unchained. Every human shipyard would shift to military production immediately, working 3 shifts around the clock to build warships faster than the galaxy had ever seen. Every retired veteran would be offered the chance to return to service, their experience desperately needed for what was to come. The sealed vaults beneath old military bases would be opened and weapons that had been forbidden since the last great war on Earth would be brought back into. The light-gravity lances that could crush a ship like a can, nanoswarms that could eat through any armor, nuclear devices that made the old atomic bombs look like toys, and something simply called Hellfire that the Admiral spoke of in whispers. The assembly listened in complete silence as Chun laid out the cost in resources and lives and moral certainty. Then they voted, and the vote was unanimous. Humanity would go to war. For 3 weeks, the silence continued while human factories burned hot and human soldiers trained for combat that would shake the stars. Recruitment centers overflowed with volunteers, young people who had watched the Meridian footage and felt something wake up inside them, something ancient and terrible that their ancestors had carried through ice ages and world wars and plagues that should have ended them. They were not angry. Not exactly, because anger was hot and loud and temporary. What they felt was colder than that, quieter than that, a resolve that settled into their bones and would not leave until the job was finished on the 21st day of silence. Admiral Chun walked into a communication center on Luna and sat down before a microphone that would broadcast across the entire galaxy. His face appeared on screens in every council chamber and every news station and every Vectri command post. An older Asian man with grief in his eyes and steel in his voice. He spoke only 4 words before the transmission cut and the silence returned. You killed our healers. High Commander Zorath saw the message and felt the first flicker of something he did not recognize. A cold sensation in his stomach that he had never experienced before. He told himself it was excitement at the thought of more easy victories. He told himself that humans were bluffing because they did not have the strength to challenge Dominion. Power. He told himself many things in those final days before the storm arrived. But deep in the oldest part of his brain, in the place where instinct lived, he knew that he had made a terrible mistake. The silence stretched on for 1 more week while humanity gathered its fury and pointed it at the stars. Then the silence ended, And the galaxy learned what humans could do when their healers were murdered. The Vectri had wanted to teach humanity a lesson about power. They were about to receive an education they would never forget. The sky above Vector Prime was beautiful that morning. Twin suns rising over mountains of black stone. While the capital city stirred to life and billions of Vectri began another day of conquest and cruelty, High Commander Zorath was eating his morning meal in his palace overlooking the city, still laughing about the human broadcast and planning his next raid against the soft species of the galaxy. He never finished that meal. The first warning came from a sensor station on the edge of the system. A panicked transmission that cut off mid-sentence and left only static behind. Then another station went silent, and another, until the entire outer defense network was simply gone. Zorath rushed to his command center and demanded answers. But his officers could only stare at their screens in horror as something emerged from hyperspace above their homeworld ships. More ships than anyone had ever seen in one place. Human warships pouring out of faster-than-light travel in a wave that seemed endless. There were battleships the size of small moons, bristling with weapons that glowed with terrible light. And there were carriers launching fighters in swarms that darkened the stars. And there were cruisers and destroyers and frigates in numbers that made the Vectri fleet look like a child's toy collection. Admiral Wei Chun sat in his command chair aboard the flagship Remembrance and watched the Vectri homeworld grow larger on his view screen. He felt nothing but cold purpose as he ordered the fleet to hold position and prepare for broadcast his communication. Officer opened a channel to every receiver on the planet below and every ship in the Vectri fleet and every news station watching from across the galaxy. Then she played a recording that made Zorath's blood run cold. It was the distress call of the Meridian. Captain Vance's voice begging for mercy while weapons fire tore her ship apart. 11 seconds of terror and death that the Vectri had broadcast as entertainment. The recording played on every screen on Vector Prime, in homes and schools and military bases, over and over again, while 3,000 human warships waited in the sky above when the recording finally stopped. Admiral Chun spoke in a voice that carried no anger and no hatred, only the terrible calm of a man who had already accepted what he must do. "You have 1 hour to evacuate your civilian population centers," he announced. "We are not here to murder children or burn families in their homes. We are here to end your military power forever. Anyone who does not wish to fight should leave the combat zones immediately." High Commander Zorath heard those words and felt that strange cold sensation again. Stronger now, demanding attention. For a moment, just a moment, he considered surrender. Then his pride rose up and crushed that thought and replaced it with fury at the idea of humans telling him what to do. He ordered the entire Dominion fleet to attack. 800 warships that had conquered 12 systems and never known defeat. And he promised medals and glory to whoever brought him a human admiral's head. The Vectri fleet surged forward in perfect attack formation, their warriors howling battle cries and their weapons charging with enough power to crack plants. The human fleet did not move, did not howl, did not make any sound at all. Admiral Chun simply said, "Execute." The gravity lances fired first. Invisible beams that twisted the fabric of space itself and crushed Vectri ships like insects beneath a boot. Hulls crumpling inward and reactors detonating in chains of silent fire. Then came the missiles. Thousands of them launched in perfect synchronized waves. And the Vectri point defense systems tried to shoot them down, but there were simply too many. An overwhelming tide that broke against their formation and shattered ship after ship after ship. The fighters engaged next. Small craft piloted by humans who fought with mechanical precision and ice-cold discipline, never wasting a shot and never breaking formation and never showing any emotion at all. It was that silence that horrified. The watching galaxy more than anything else, Vectory warriors screamed and roared, and beat their chests as they fought. Because that was how warriors were supposed to behave. That was how every species fought when blood was hot and death was near. But the humans were quiet, communicating in clipped technical jargon and coordinating their attacks with the efficiency of machines. Killing with the same casual ease that ordinary people might use to swat flies. They did not hate the Vectory. That was what made it so terrible. They simply deleted them from existence with all the passion of accountants balancing a spreadsheet. The battle raged for 9 hours across the Vector system. 800 Dominion ships, fighting desperately against a force they could not stop and could not understand. For every human ship that died, 30 Vectory vessels burned. And the numbers only got worse as the hours passed, and the Dominion fleet grew smaller and more desperate. Zorath watched from his palace as his mighty navy was dismantled piece by piece. As warriors who had never known fear began to flee and were cut down anyway. As the sky above his world filled with the burning wreckage of everything he had built near the end, the humans deployed a weapon that no one in the galaxy had ever seen before. Missiles that the crews called Hellfire torpedoes that struck the largest Vectory command ships and consumed them in flames that burned white-hot for hours. When the sun set on Vector Prime that day, the Dominion fleet existed only as debris, scattered metal, and frozen bodies drifting in the void where proud warships had sailed that morning. Admiral Chun looked at the destruction and felt no satisfaction. Only the weight of what still needed to be done. The space battle was won. But the war was not over. He gave the order to begin ground operations, and human dropships began to fall toward the planet below like rain made of steel. The Vectory had wanted to test humanity's strength. Now they would learn exactly how much strength humanity had been hiding behind those soft smiles and gentle words and offers of friendship. The lesson had only just begun. The dropships came down through fire and smoke. Human soldiers in powered armor falling from the sky like metal angels of death, while Vectory ground batteries tried desperately to shoot them down. Colonel Sarah Mitchell was the first to hit the ground on Vector Prime, her boots cracking stone as she landed in the courtyard of a military complex that had never known enemy attack. She was a small woman by Vectory standards, barely reaching the chest of the 8-foot warriors who charged at her with blades raised and fury in their eyes. 3 seconds later, she was the only one standing, her armor splattered with alien blood and her rifle smoking in her hands. Complex secure, she reported in that same flat tone that made alien observers shiver. Moving to secondary objective. Across 12 worlds, the story repeated itself as human marines descended on every Vectory military installation, every weapons factory, every command bunker and training facility and ammunition depot. The Vectory had expected the humans to fight like other species, to charge forward in rage and make mistakes that could be exploited, to tire and falter and eventually break against Dominion defenders. Instead, the humans moved like water flowing through cracks, finding every weakness and exploiting every gap, never stopping and never slowing, and never giving the defenders a moment to breathe. Their powered armor shrugged off weapons that should have torn through metal and bone, the suits healing damage almost as fast as it was inflicted, while their wearers continued fighting without pause. They fought in conditions that would have killed unprotected soldiers in minutes, advancing through toxic atmospheres that burned lungs and crushing gravity that shattered bones and freezing darkness that stopped hearts. Nothing stopped them. Nothing even slowed them down. But what confused the Vectory more than the human fighting power was the human restraint. Admiral Chun had issued one absolute order before the ground campaign began. An order that every soldier memorized and every officer enforced with iron discipline. No civilians. Human squads would advance through residential areas and simply walk past. Vectory children staring from windows, their weapons pointed at the ground and their eyes scanning for military threats that were not there. They evacuated hospitals before destroying the military bases next door, carrying wounded Vectory doctors to safety zones with the same care they would show their own people. When Vectory soldiers threw down their weapons and raised their hands, human Marines stopped shooting and took them prisoner, treating their wounds and feeding them rations and reading them rites that the Dominion had never heard of. A Vectory officer named Krath was captured on the third day of the ground war, his unit destroyed and his leg shattered by debris. Expecting torture and slow death at the hands of the humans he had been taught to despise, instead a human medic knelt beside him and injected painkillers into his neck and splinted his leg with gentle hands, speaking softly about how he would be treated fairly and given a trial and allowed to see his family again. Why? Krath managed to ask through the fog of medication. We killed your people. We laughed about it. Why do you not make us suffer? The medic looked at him with eyes that held sadness but no hatred. Because causing suffering is what you do, she said. And we refuse to become you. High Commander. Zorath hid in his bunker beneath the capital city while the world burned above him. Surrounded by guards who were more afraid of him than they were of the humans, waiting for the enemy to break through his final defenses. He had prepared for this moment in his own way, setting traps and calling in his most loyal warriors and telling himself that he would die gloriously in battle like a true Vectory commander. But when the bunker doors finally exploded inward and human soldiers poured through the smoke, Zorath did not fight. He cowered behind his throne with his claws over his head, whimpering and begging for mercy in a voice that his warriors had never heard before. Colonel Mitchell looked down at the architect of the Meridian Massacre and felt something twist in her stomach. Not satisfaction at his fear, but disappointment that this pathetic creature was the monster they had come so far to find. High Commander Zorath, she said in a formal tone, you are under arrest for war crimes against the people of Earth and violations of galactic humanitarian law. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to legal representation. Zora stared at her in complete confusion because he had expected death and fire and revenge. Not this strange ritual of words and rites. You are not going to kill me? He whispered. Mitchell shook her head slowly. That would be too easy, she replied. You will stand trial before the galaxy, and everyone will see what you truly are. Not a mighty warrior, but a coward who murdered healers, and then hid in a hole when real soldiers came to hold him accountable. They dragged Zorath out of his bunker and loaded him onto a transport ship while cameras from every major news network in the galaxy recorded every moment. He looked small and old and terrified. Nothing like the proud commander who had broadcast the Meridian's destruction and promised to bring humanity to its knees across 12 worlds. Vectory military power crumbled and died as human forces systematically destroyed every weapon and every ship and every installation that could threaten anyone ever again. 6 weeks after the first dropship landed, the Vectory Dominion formally surrendered. Its military shattered, and its pride broken, and its future in the hands of the species they had called prey. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as human forces began to withdraw, leaving behind peacekeepers and aid workers and the same white-crossed medical ships that had started this whole terrible chapter. They had proven that they could destroy the Dominion completely, and then they had chosen not to. That was what frightened the watching empires most of all. The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Ambassador Sarah Okonkwo rose from her seat and walked to the central podium, her footsteps echoing in a room that held representatives from over 500 species. She was a tall woman with dark skin and gray hair and eyes that had seen too much death in too short a time. Chosen by Earth to speak for humanity in this moment that would shape the galaxy for centuries to come, every ambassador in the chamber expected her to demand territory and tribute and submission, because that was what conquering species always demanded. That was how power worked in a galaxy that had known nothing but competition since life first crawled out of ancient seas. The Vecturi representative sat in chains at the back of the room. High Commander Zorath forced to watch as his empire's fate was decided by others. His trial already scheduled and his guilt already certain, Sarah stood at the podium and looked out at the assembled species. The predators and the prey and the countless beings in between, all of them watching humanity with new eyes when she spoke. Her voice was soft, but it carried to every corner of the room. "We did not want this war," she began. 6 months ago, our people were traveling the stars in peace, trading and exploring and sending medical ships to help those in need. We asked for nothing but friendship, and we threatened no one. She paused and let the silence stretch. Then the Vecturi killed 43 of our people. Doctors and nurses who carried nothing but medicine. Healers who had dedicated their lives to helping others. And the Dominion broadcast their deaths as entertainment. Murmurs rippled through the chamber, but Sarah continued without raising her voice. "You all saw what we did in response. You saw our fleet and our weapons and our soldiers. You saw us break an empire that had terrorized this region of space for centuries. And now you are wondering what we want in return for our blood and treasure." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small photograph, holding it up so the cameras could capture the image of 2 young boys on a beach. "This is Marcus Chen and his brother Wei," she said. Marcus became a doctor and died on the Meridian. Wei became an admiral and destroyed the Dominion fleet. They grew up together on a planet called Earth, where we teach our children that helping others is more important than conquering them. She put the photograph away and gripped the edges of the podium. "We do not want Vecturi worlds because we have enough worlds of our own. We do not want slaves because we find slavery disgusting. We do not want tribute because we are not thieves." The chamber was utterly silent now. Hundreds of ambassadors leaning forward to hear what humanity wanted from its victory. "We want 3 things," Sarah announced. "First, the war criminals who ordered and carried out the Meridian Massacre will stand trial under galactic law, fairly and publicly, so that justice is done and seen to be done." She glanced at Zorath, who could not meet her eyes. "Second, the Vecturi government will pay reparations to the families of the Meridian crew, not to enrich Earth, but to acknowledge that those 43 lives had value and their loss deserves recognition." The Vecturi ambassador nodded slowly, because this was less than they had expected, far less than they had feared. "Third, and most important, we want this council to pass a new law, a law that makes any attack on medical or humanitarian vessels an automatic act of war against every signatory species." She looked around the chamber at faces from worlds she had never visited and species she had never met. "Never again," she said with steel in her voice. "Never again will healers be murdered while the galaxy watches and does nothing. Never again will any empire think that attacking the helpless is without consequence. Never again will compassion be mistaken for weakness." The vote was called within the hour, and the result was unanimous. Every species in the Galactic Council signing the new law that would protect humanitarian missions forever. As Sarah returned to her seat, she passed the Rithoki delegate, a reptilian creature whose species had conquered 6 systems through methods almost as brutal as the Vecturi. He leaned toward her and whispered a question that had been burning in his mind since the war ended. "Why did you not take everything? You had the power. You had the right of conquest. You could have claimed their worlds and made them slaves. Why did you show mercy to creatures who showed none to you?" Sarah stopped and considered the question carefully before answering. "Because the 43 people on that ship did not die so we could become monsters," she said quietly. "They died because they believed in helping others. They died because they thought that kindness could make the galaxy better. And if we burned everything down out of pure revenge, we would be spitting on everything they stood for." She started to walk away, then paused and looked back at the Radoki with eyes that held both warmth and warning. But do not mistake our mercy for weakness. She added, "We showed restraint because we chose to, not because we had to. Hurt our people again, and we will not stop at your military. We will not stop at your government. We will not stop until there is nothing left of your species but a warning to others." The Rathoki ambassador felt a chill run down his spine despite the warm chamber. "I understand," he managed to say. "Good," Sarah replied. "Now go home and tell your leaders what you saw here today. Tell them that humans remember their friends and they remember their enemies. Tell them that the galaxy has changed, and those who do not change with will be left behind." She returned to her seat as the council session continued. Her work done for now, but her eyes already looking toward the future. Admiral Wei Chun watched the proceedings from Earth, holding the same photograph that Sarah had shown the council, finally allowing himself to grieve now that the war was over. His brother was still dead, and nothing would bring him back. But the galaxy would remember Marcus and the others forever, not as victims, but as the reason why humanity showed the universe what it was made of. The Vectory Dominion rebuilt slowly under supervision. Their military power gone, but their people allowed to live and eventually to prosper in a galaxy that now had rules about how wars should be fought. High Commander Zoroth was convicted of war crimes and sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison, forced to watch recordings of the Meridian crew helping alien children on a dozen worlds, forced to understand exactly what he had destroyed and across the galaxy. Species large and small looked at humanity with new understanding. The soft species, they had called them. The healers and traders and dreamers who believed in compassion. Now they knew the truth that Earth had always known, that kindness and strength were not opposites, that mercy could exist alongside power, that the most dangerous creatures in the universe were not the ones who loved violence, but the ones who loved peace and were willing to fight for it. For 300 years after the Vectory War, no species in the galaxy touched a human ship. They had learned their lesson well.